The Late Night News brought to you by Hyundai's super stylish Sonata and Telstra. It doesn't cost much to stay in touch.
Heading the late night news, a Senate win. The Howard government sways key independents on the Telstra sell-off.
We will have a first-class commitment to our environmental future. We'll have a without parallel commitment to our communications future.
A $50 million drug haul by Australian Customs. And the entertainment industry mourns the death of an Australian icon.
The Late Night News with Sandra Sully.
Good evening. First tonight, the Howard government has scored a major victory in the Senate, convincing two key independents to back its plan to sell off part of Telstra. The independents were wooed with special deals that eased their concerns about the environment and jobs. Democrats leader Cheryl Kernow's birthday song tonight, saying it all. The opposition party's dream of killing off the $8 billion third sale of Telstra disintegrated on the day they've dubbed Independence Day, the day Senators Mal Colston and Brian Harradine went with the government.
It wasn't an easy decision for me to make. That's all there is to it.
In fact, it was only made in the last 24 hours when the government found an extra $100 million for the Tasmanian environment, Brian Harradine's concern, and more for Mal Colston's pet, regional jobs.
The government is prepared to commit $250 million from the proceeds of the potential sale of Telstra to create a regional telecommunications infrastructure fund.
On those two matters, that satisfied me.
But devastated opponents branded it a blatant sellout.
This is a deal for the big end of town.
This means, for very many people, poorer services. It will probably, at the end of the day, mean timed local calls.
A bitter Labor leader vowing Mal Colston had today assured he'd never be an ALP man again.
I suppose there's always a time after hell freezes over.
A final vote is expected next week, and while there's a long list of amendments proposed, success is virtually assured. A prospect a gleeful Prime Minister is clearly revelling in.
We will have a first-class commitment to our environmental future. We'll have a without parallel commitment to our communications future.
Tracy Chamberlain, 10 News. A Melbourne court has been told a jeweller and two members of his family were gunned down after a business deal went horribly wrong. 41-year-old Manuel Artijan, charged over the double killing in central Melbourne yesterday, has been remanded in custody.
The court was told 41-year-old Manuel Artijan worked as a jeweller just 4 floors below the scene of the killing. He allegedly entered the Pin's family gem business to make a part payment of a debt owed to the family. After an argument, he allegedly shot dead Leon Thuan Pin, his 25-year-old son Virith, and critically wounded Leon's wife Siv En Ping. An automatic Russian pistol was later recovered at the scene. All bullets had been fired.
I can say that a total of 9 shots were fired. Each victim was shot 3 times.
A jacket containing a quantity of jewellery was also recovered. Police say Artijan was found 20 minutes after the shooting behind a security door. He initially told police he was a customer who'd been knocked unconscious during the gunman's raid. Artijan has been remanded in custody until April next year. Relatives of the victims are stunned by the shooting.
Very shocked and very sad that we heard that. They come straight to see them.
I spoke to the eldest daughter this morning. She was in tears, and we as a community try to help out.
It was Mr. Pin's lifelong dream to have a gem store in the city. That dream only realised this year. Mrs. Pin remains in hospital fighting for her life.
She's conscious, but she's in real pain in the hospital. So our hearts go to the family.
Melissa Aston, 10 News.
Australian customs officers have seized cannabis with a street value of $50 million hidden in a shipping container on the Sydney waterfront. It's the biggest drug bust in Australian customs history, but all efforts to track the smugglers have so far failed.
Inside these sacks, more than 5 tonnes of compressed cannabis head, the estimated street value $50 million. Customs officers at Sydney's Port Botany last month had suspicions about the contents of this shipping container from Cambodia but they had to be sure, so they called in detector dog Quizzy.
Good dog!
The shipment was packed in 258 rice sacks, which in turn were loaded into the container. False walls were fitted into place to avoid detection. The container was then filled with bales of jute or rope-like fibre. It's the biggest drug find in the history of the Customs Service, and news of the bust quickly travelled to Canberra.
Mr. Speaker, this is the largest consignment of illicit drugs ever found in cargo in Australia.
But there's one thing worrying federal police. No one's arrived to lay claim to the shipment, suggesting the importers have been tipped off. Customs and federal agents say there's no doubt the drugs came from the infamous Golden Triangle via Singapore. And while the drug smugglers may have gone to ground, police are keen to catch those who tipped them off. Federal police checked the container's manifest. The company scheduled to collect the cargo doesn't exist. Sean Fewings, 10 News.
Meantime, more than $1 million in cash and gold jewellery has been found buried in a suburban backyard in Melbourne. It's the biggest cash seizure in Victoria. The loot was discovered as part of an 18-month drug operation. The bundles of cash stored in 23 glass jars buried in this backyard. A 32-year-old man and his girlfriend who have been charged with heroin-related offences. Police have since raided another 4 houses. Evidence at the Wood Royal Commission, former New South Wales Supreme Court Judge David Yeldham was protected by police in return for favourable court decisions. There was fresh evidence of Mr Yeldham's sexual misconduct at train stations, but he was never charged.
The focus on David Yeldham's train station activities moved to Central Station today, and the alleged police cover-up became clearer. A state rail officer told the Royal Commission he caught Mr Yeldham in the station toilets with another man in 1988, while he was still a Supreme Court judge. The officer reported the matter to this man, Senior Sergeant Phil Peters, who allegedly told him police knew Mr Yeldham was a homosexual, but to look after him because he was on side. I took that to mean Yeldham was on the side of police, that he would give us good decisions in court. The witness said Sergeant Peters forced him to sign a false statement about the toilet incident, saying only senior police would see it. Peters basically told me to keep my mouth shut, that he would see his friends at College Street and the matter would be dealt with. Sergeant Peters denied making the comments. Mr Yeldham committed suicide last month when he was connected to the Royal Commission. Police weren't the only ones who knew about Mr Yeldham's double life. Even the then Chief Justice, Sir Lawrence Street, heard rumours of sexual misconduct in the early 1980s, but chose